Brad is the founder of a small nonprofit organization focused on raising funds for charity. One morning, while dining at a restaurant with one of his employees, the employee suddenly announced his resignation. He explained that at his age, he could earn much more elsewhere, or even start his own, more successful fundraising company. The words hit Brad like a slap. That night, he lay awake, haunted by the conversation. He began reflecting on his own life and questioned why, after decades in his field, he hadn't achieved the kind of success his friends had. He recalled a recent reunion. One friend was now a famous Hollywood director, another owned a large company, one held a high-ranking government position, and another had already retired to enjoy the fruits of wise investments. Brad, by comparison, felt like a failure. Yet in truth, his life wasn't lacking. His organization, though modest, was stable. His wife had a good job, they owned a nice home, a car, and their only son was well-behaved and successful at school. But envy clouded his perspective as he compared himself to his more outwardly successful peers. The next day, Brad traveled with his son, Troy, to Boston to apply for college. At the airport, the distance in their relationship was clear. They sat in silence. Attempting to bond, Brad asked Troy to upgrade their economy tickets to VIP, but they were denied due to a discount coupon. The rejection embarrassed Brad and triggered more insecurity. He wondered if his successful friends had ever flown economy, remembering how they casually spoke of private jets and first-class flights at the reunion. Brad also began to question whether marrying his humble, content wife had dimmed his own ambition. Unlike his friends-driven spouses, his wife never pressured him to chase greater wealth or status. Brad blamed himself for settling into a comfortable but unimpressive life. Upon arriving in Boston, they checked into a hotel. That evening, over dinner, Brad asked Troy about his college aspirations. To his surprise, Troy shared his dream of studying music at Harvard, inspired by a teacher and his idol, now a Harvard lecturer. Brad felt a swell of pride. He hadn't even known his son played piano so well. Back in the hotel room, Brad quietly observed Troy and felt a flicker of hope. Maybe Troy's future could redeem the dreams Brad felt he had lost. He imagined the pride of seeing his son graduate from Harvard and become a famous musician, something to elevate their family name. In that moment, Brad's envy faded. He believed Troy could outshine the children of all his successful friends. The next day, however, brought disappointment. Troy had misread his interview schedule. The session had been the day before. Admissions were now closed. Brad was crushed. Desperate, Brad called his wife, Melanie, hoping she had a connection at Harvard. She suggested he reach out to Craig, a former college friend now working in government, who might know someone at the university. But Brad was hesitant. Years earlier, Craig had belittled him when Brad sought investment for his nonprofit. Craig had ignored his emails and acted superior. Brad's pride resisted the idea of seeking help from someone who once looked down on him. But for Troy's future, he swallowed his ego and asked another friend for Craig's contact. That friend, while giving Craig's number, couldn't help but boast about his luxurious life in Hawaii with 2 glamorous girlfriends. The green-eyed monster returned, but Brad reminded himself to stay focused. Craig's phone was off, so Brad left a voicemail. The next day at breakfast, Craig called back. After hearing the situation, Craig agreed to help and invited Brad to dinner in Boston. Brad was thrilled. Troy's Harvard dream might still be alive. Later, while shopping at a bookstore, Craig called again to say he had convinced Harvard to grant Troy a second interview. Overjoyed, Brad told Troy the news, envisioning the bright future awaiting them. Yet later that night, Brad's mind spiraled again. What if Troy failed? What if he never became a renowned musician but ended up as a street performer? Would his friends mock him even more? That evening, Troy invited Brad to meet his high school senior, Ananya, now a student at Harvard. The three dined together, and Brad was struck by Ananya's charm and brilliance. When Ananya's friend Maya joined them, Brad found himself captivated by both women's youthful beauty and spirit. He remembered when his wife once had that same glow, but now, with age, it seemed to have dimmed. Brad's thoughts turned wild. He imagined that if he were wealthy, he too could have 2 vibrant girlfriends like his boastful friend in Hawaii. When Ananya invited him to a bar with her friends, Brad wanted to go, but Troy, underage and focused on his interview, declined. Brad pretended to stay behind, but once Troy was asleep, he snuck out to join them. At the bar, Brad drank and opened up about his insecurities. He expected sympathy. Instead, Ananya gave him a reality check. Life isn't a competition, she said. Many people Brad envied were probably struggling in ways he couldn't see. There are people out there who can't even afford a meal. Comparing lives is not only unhelpful, it's meaningless. Brad was stunned into silence. The next morning, Brad took Troy to his Harvard interview. While waiting, he called Melanie to update her. When Troy returned, he was confident and optimistic. The meeting had gone well, thanks to the connection Craig had provided. They also visited Tufts University as a backup. While walking around the campus, Brad visited his old supervisor's office only to learn the man had passed away. He wondered if he hadn't been told because of how far he had fallen behind his peers. That night, Brad met Craig for dinner. The waitress, seeing Craig's importance, offered him a prime table and special treatment, while Brad was seated by the noisy kitchen. Still, Brad thanked Craig sincerely for helping Troy. As they chatted, Craig began gossiping about their old friends. But instead of tales of triumph, he revealed the dark truths. One friend had nearly gone to jail for tax fraud, another had a critically ill child, and one had fled to Hawaii after a failed investment. Even the private jets? Bought with embezzled funds. Brad was stunned. The people he'd spent so long envying had their own secret struggles. Maybe even Craig did too. He felt foolish for idealizing their lives, for chasing validation, for begging Craig for help. In a surge of clarity, Brad lashed out. He no longer respected Craig, and with his pride restored, he left the restaurant to meet Troy and attend Ananya and Maya's orchestra concert. As the music filled the hall, Brad was moved. Surrounded by the beauty of the performance and the presence of his son, he finally saw things clearly. His life wasn't lacking. It was rich in love, family, and meaning. Back at the hotel, Troy shocked him with a decision. He no longer wanted to attend Harvard. He'd fallen in love with Tufts during their visit. The people were kind, the environment welcoming. He saw himself there. Then, Troy asked if Brad was okay, if he'd had a breakdown. Brad opened up. He admitted his fear of being seen as a failure. Troy listened, then gently reminded his father of a truth he'd learned himself. People don't spend their lives judging your failures. They're too caught up in their own. Instead of worrying about strangers' opinions, focus on those who truly care. And for Brad, that meant his family. Brad asked his son what he thought of him. "I love you," Troy replied. Brad smiled, truly smiled, for the first time in a long while. As Troy slept that night, Brad looked at his son and reflected. He'd raised a good, kind young man. He had a loving wife. A stable, meaningful life. Why had he ever needed to compare? Brad finally understood. Life isn't a competition. It's a journey meant to be lived with gratitude.